a lot of the material was shipped from Aswan, right? Which is a major city along the Nile. And if I think about it correctly, incredibly far from Cairo, contemporary Cairo, about, I think it's close to 1,000 kilometers away. And you can imagine,
wow,
right, 4,500 years ago, right, you haven't invented the wheel yet. How do you get...
Yeah, that's like a continent. That's a continent away.
Yeah. How do you get material 1,000 kilometers to your new site, right? And
so this is where some build of infrastructure comes in terms of facilitating for that transfer of that material from Aswan to Memphis or Giza area.
Exactly. So you could say the OG infrastructure that led Egypt to be so significant is the river itself, right, which we've mentioned. And for the majority of the journey, those blocks were obviously carried across the river. And we're talking massive, huge blocks. The average weight was 2.3 metric tons, right? So wow. It's pretty insane. And
each block was the equivalent to a car, essentially, in weight.
I mean, even a modern contemporary car is a lot less than a ton.
Well,
I would say, let me think.
Like a Jeep?
I mean,
Hummer?
Still much heavier than those. Let's do, Ford Focus?
I think a Ford Focus would be like 1.1, 1.2 tons.
So a Ford Focus is 1.4 tons, right?
Yeah.
And these blocks were about double that.
Wow.
Yeah. So imagine that. You don't have wheels, and somehow you're going to carve these blocks out of the cliffside, out of a quarry.
Carve these blocks that are the size. Well, what about size-wise? What were they like size-wise? And because we know in terms of weight, they were kind of like the weight of like a people carrier, right? Like a Jeep of sorts. But then, what about like the actual size of them?
They're massive. They're exact. So about 2 by 3 meters, essentially.
Yeah, it's cars, moving cars.
Yeah, you're moving cars, except you don't have wheels.
Really big cars, 2 by 3 meters.
Exactly. And you don't have a combustion engine, right? So your first problem is that you need to get these blocks downhill into the river. And how exactly, Tim, do you do that without inventing the wheel?
I guess, lots of human labor.
Man, you can throw 1 million people at that. They can't pick up a mountain. You get me?
Yeah.
So it's actually really clever. And only recently people have discovered exactly the method for how they've done it. So they always thought that they used these sleds, right, with basically timber pieces put upright in the sand, and the blocks were shifted onto these sleds, and then
they would slide down onto like. Wait! But would the sleds carry? Would the sleds like shift and then carry the blocks on the river to the destination?
So basically, what happens is the sleds themselves are pulled along by manual labor, like you said.
Yeah.
And essentially, the sand, because one of the big issues, right, with a something that heavy is that if you pull a sled in the sand with a 2.4 ton weight on it, it'll just dig into the sand in front of it, right? If anybody's driven a car in a sand pile, the whole reason we have hard roads is because this happens a lot. So what they discovered is a really simple technique, which is that they would dig out the sand immediately in front of the sled, and they would wet it to make it a harder surface temporarily. And they would pull just for that portion and wet the next, and repeat this process until they reach the river, which is...
Oh, wow. So they just created temporary roads, like
exactly.
Constantly, like just going along and along it.
Exactly. And then once they hit the river, obviously massive barges to get it down the river.
But speaking about that, so yes, we have this technique that they figured out in terms of we'll pull along these sleds of these massive pillars, and as we're doing it, we're like wetting the sand along to kind of solidify it and ease that transport. But then, where did they get the water to constantly be doing that? What devices did they have for that? Were they just using simple buckets? And if so, like, how did they organize, like, getting people to constantly carry it or have so much on hand?
That is an excellent question. Okay, so obviously buckets are the most basic of technologies, but the Egyptians were incredible lock builders, right? And that stemmed from their knowledge in agriculture. And
but by a lock builder, what do you mean by a lock builder?
A lock is like a controllable dam, you know? When, let's say, in the Panama Canal, right? Or in canals across the world, there are portions where a boat has to go uphill, right? So how do they do that?
I don't know, do they adjust the flow of the water? I don't know.
No, water is crazy. You can't control it at all. Essentially, you create two dams with a mobile dam wall, essentially. And you...
Oh, like a type of separator, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you put your barge into the one side, and you close the dam walls, which are much higher than the river heights. And essentially, you fill in the lower dam, so it matches the height of the river above it. And the pressure of the water lifts the boat itself. So you can use this system to actually get water uphill as well. And that assisted with them supplying water to the quarries and all of these places. Because also you remember that locations of these quarries are quite a few kilometers off of the Nile, and they needed a way to get water to the settlements that were living out in the desert, essentially.
Yeah.
And this all came from like centuries of agriculture control and planting seeds, and really a top-down economic structure, essentially, that had to do with planting exactly at a certain time, because the Nile was incredibly predictable, essentially. And people needed to know exactly when and where and how water would rise and when it would drop. And it led to, essentially, and it's called techne, which is like technical knowledge, not necessarily theoretical knowledge. It's like a trial and error kind of situation where people eventually develop the techniques for using this technology. But I mean, that's an incredible piece of infrastructure in itself that came from the agriculture technology that was the founding of the Egyptian civilization, etc.
Okay, so then, going back to the water supply. So, how did they use the lock? You said, so the Egyptians were incredible lock builders. How did this play into them having a constant supply of water ready to harden the sand and create these temporary paths, these temporary roads to help shift along these massive blocks on these sleds?
So if you think about the building of the pyramids, right, it's not actually one piece of infrastructure, right? It's a series, right? The first is the Nile itself. The second is these locks to the quarries. The quarries themselves are a third piece of infrastructure, because they need a labor force, they need a settlement, etc. And only then, after you've got the barges for the Nile, you've got the locks to the quarry, you've got the brick cutting techniques, the stone cutting techniques for the quarry itself, and the sled techniques to get the huge blocks down to the river.
Yeah.
After you have all that infrastructure, only then can you get this block all the way to Cairo, to Memphis, essentially, to build your pyramid. So you could think of the locks themselves as their own huge infrastructure projects, in the same way we would build a bridge or a dam today. And practically, consider it as like a series of buckets. That you can use the water from you dig a hole to the one side, which is slightly lower than the other bucket, and you can lift the water by pumping it in to that space. And using a series of locks and the height of the different spaces, the pressure pushes up the water. I don't have a video for you, but it's some pretty amazing engineering.
Okay. Well, let's just say, you've got like a group of people. They're pulling along this sled with this massive pillar, and they're pulling it along the path. And just, if we can paint the picture, like how does we've got the people holding the buckets of water, constantly keeping them wet. So I can imagine you then have like, what are there other people kind of waiting further along the path with buckets of water ready to do that job.
Exactly.
And how those people further along the path get in that water in the first place. Where are they going to get that water? Are they running along to this lock area that's kind of supplied the water closer than them, that would have been the case if it wasn't there? Like, if we could, I'm just trying to like figure this out in my head like a picture,
So essentially, right, it's exactly as you described. It's a series of teams that work in shifts. Let's put it this way, right?
Yeah.
You're on the River Nile, right? You're in Aswan, which is a settlement, an ancient city there, right?
Yes.
There's a harbour at Aswan, which is from the River Nile, right? From that harbour, you are creating a canal, right? A river.
Yes.
You're creating a river between Aswan and the mountainside, okay?
Yeah.
So you're building this river. It goes in a straight line, and it's staked.
And Aswan is where the harbour is.
Aswan is where the harbour is, right?
So you're creating a river between the harbour
to the mountainside, right?
Yeah, from the harbour to the mountainside.
Exactly. You make that river out of you put the embankments of the river are made out of timber, right? And it has dams along the way, so it's going uphill essentially. It's using water wheels to pump the water. It's pumping the water uphill, essentially.
And just to clarify, like the timber that you're talking about, this is what you're using to help direct the flow of the water, right?
It's just the embankment. It's like the container of the water.
The container?
Yeah.
So you're talking about it helps give it shape and direct it to where it needs to go?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So once they're done building this river to the mountainside, right?
Yes.
At the mountainside, they make a big lake, a dam, basically, right?
Yes.
Okay. And at that dam, they build another harbour, right? With a settlement.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So once they get there, now you have a dam with a harbour with a settlement next to the mountainside, right?
Yep.
Now, the mountainside itself is where they want to build the quarry. So it's slightly removed. It's slightly further away from this new dam, right?
Okay, yep.
Okay. But now they have a water source that is at the top of the hill next to the mountainside. Okay?
Yes.
So the quarry is quarried, right? It's a mine, right? They dig into the mountainside and they cut the stone from the mountainside.
Yep.
You follow? Okay.
Yep.
So once that stone is removed, right, they start with the smaller blocks, right? And what they do is that they replace. Is this too much detail, Tim? I feel
no.
like
No, this is kind of more is painting more of a picture in my mind. So I guess what I'm kind of getting from you right now is this Nile is used to the water from this Nile is directed to make a lake, a dam of sorts, and then that dam is there by the mountainside, and it's close enough to where they're building the blocks, and they just like maybe form a human line from like where the blocks are and the sleds to the dam.
Exactly.